Hey folks, and welcome back to this video series on exploring Azure IoT Operations using the Docs and Learn tutorials. This is the third video in the series so far. So in the first video, which the bit.ly will be on the screen now, we explored how we could use GitHub code spaces to deploy a Kubernetes cluster and Arc enable that, and then go ahead and get Azure IoT Operations hooked up within that. Then in the second video, we took a simulated temperature sensor and then added that as an OPC UA asset. And then we used Acri, the discovery service, to be able to discover a second asset. And so now we've got some data flowing from our simulated temperature sensor through IoT operations. What we want to do really is visualize that data. But before we can do that, we need to get that data up into the cloud somehow. So in this tutorial, we'll be stepping through how we can use Azure's Lakehouse in Fabric and then Power BI in the next video to be able to then take that data and then create some sort of a dashboard from it. So we start here in the Docs and Learn tutorial. Again, as always, the bit.ly will be on the screen so that you can follow along yourself. And scrolling down here, again, it's warning us that IoT Operations is in preview. So everything we do here isn't really production ready, but it's great for just stepping through and getting used to how this is all hooked together and working. So there are some prerequisites that we need to follow along with here, and they include the previous two tutorials, which again, the bit.lys will be on the screen for, so that you can go back and continue. So you're going to need to do those first. Next up, we're going to need a Microsoft Fabric subscription. Now you can create yourself a free account by following this link here, which will take you to a page that allows you to be able to sign up. And you can see here that we're logged in as our IoT Ops user. This was the user we created in Entra to be able to allow our IoT operations access to our resource group to be able to deploy IoT operations and Arc enabling and all of those bits. So you need to go ahead and create this account, absolutely, because we're going to use this one to create our Fabric bits in a little minute. But we're also going to need an admin account over the top of this to be able to change some settings. So you'll also need a Fabric account for the admin user on your tenant. And so returning to our tutorial here, we need to set a couple of these tenant settings. So we can see that we're going to need to do allow service principals to use Power BI APIs, and users can access data stored in OneLake with apps external to Fabric. Now, certainly this top one is a little bit misleading because actually it's talking about the Fabric APIs here in general, and we'll see that in our tenant settings. But if we switch over to Fabric, and here I've logged in as my admin user, so if I click my account here at the top right, then we can see that I've logged in as an admin user here. I've started the trial already. I've clicked the Start Trial Fabric button here. But this then allows me to go ahead and make some changes to the tenant settings. Then if we click this cog in the top right hand corner, then at the bottom down here we've got the admin portal that we can go to. So going ahead and clicking that, then here we've got a bunch of different tenant settings, and there are a lot of them. So scrolling down we can see with things like ability to create workspaces and guests users can access Microsoft Fabric and so on and so forth. But we have a filter option at the top here, so we can go ahead and type in our searches in here. Now the first thing we need is the service principals can access APIs. So if we just type in service principal, then we can see here now we have service principals can use Fabric APIs. And at the moment that's disabled. So we don't want that. We need that to be enabled. So let's go ahead and enable that. So we can expand that. And then it says here that web apps registered to Microsoft Entra can use the service principals rather than user credentials. And so we're going to do this globally here. So if we switch that disabled to an enabled, we can go ahead and do that. And then we'll leave this for entire organization and click apply. It can take 15 minutes. for these settings to be applied, it says at the top right hand corner, you see here. So important that we bear that in mind for when we're running through this tutorial. You may need to pause the video and come back. So what was the next setting? The next one is that we need users can access data stored in OneLake with apps external to Fabric. And so we'll try users can access. And we can see here we've got users can access data stored in OneLake with apps external to Fabric. And that's currently enabled for the entire organization. So we don't need to worry about turning that one on. But let's have a quick look in it. And so here that's saying that users can access data stored in OneLake with apps external to Fabric environments, such as custom applications. So that's good. That's already on. So we don't need to worry too much about that one. So let's switch back to the tutorial and carry on. So scrolling down, now it's explaining to us what the problem is that we're going to solve. So we're going to be using a tool like Power BI in the end, but we need to get the data to Azure. So we're going to be enabling IoT Operations to send the data to OneLake and store the data there. And then we'll be able to then retrieve that data from what's known as Delta tables back out of the Lakehouse and into something like Power BI. So that's good. So next up, we need to grant access to our Fabric workspace. So we need to allow the MQ extension in our cluster to connect to the Microsoft Fabric workspace. So we made a note in the very first video of our MQ extension, but it's given us a nice tip here on how we can go ahead and get that MQ extension by running this azk8 extension list command. And so we can take a copy of this command. We can see here that we need to replace the resource group with our own resource group name. And our resource group is called IoT Ops. So let's go into VS Code. You'll need to make sure that this is running for the rest of the tutorial anyway. So make sure that you've got VS Code back up and running and your code space is all started up and ready. And we can paste in this command, but we need to change our resource group name to IoT Ops. And there we are. So we have some results in this. So we need the MQ extension. So if we scroll up, then here's our MQ service running here. So let's take a copy of that name there and go back to the tutorial. So we need to navigate to the Power BI Fabric experience here to ensure that we can see the Manage Access option in our Microsoft Fabric workspace. So let's go ahead and see if we can do that. And we start here in the Fabric experience. So you can see here in the top right hand corner, I've actually signed in as my IoT Ops user. So you'll need to make sure that you've got that account all set up, as well as having already set up your admin settings in the tenant. So we can then go ahead and carry on. You'll also need to make sure that you've set up your trial status here. So you need to click the free trial button. I've gone ahead and already done that, and that'll start your free Fabric trial. So you can see here that's got 59 days left now. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create a new workspace. So if we just return quickly to the tutorial, we need to select workspaces in the left navigation bar and select new workspace. And then down here, interestingly, it says that we mustn't include any spaces in the name of the workspace. So we'll remember to do that. So let's go ahead and switch back to Fabric. And we can go to the Power BI box here to get to the Power BI section. And then we can click Workspaces. And then we can click New Workspace down here at the bottom left-hand corner. And we can give this a name like PJG IoT Ops Workspace 1. So that's happy with that. Now down in the advanced section here, we need to make sure that we've got trial selected and not pro. If we zoom in a little bit, it's actually telling us here that the trial gives us access to a Fabric license as well, whereas pro doesn't. So you must make sure that you've got that selected here in trial. This is also one of the reasons I found, at least, that I couldn't do this with my admin account. I could only do this with the IoT Ops user under it. So I'm not too sure why that is. I'm doing some investigation in the back, but When I find out about that, then you can watch my Twitter and find out why that is that way. But either way, just make sure that trial is selected here. We could give this a workspace name as well. We've not got any domains to add to this yet, and we could add an image if we'd like to be able to identify this a little bit easier, but we won't do that. And then we'll leave everything else as it is because we've not been told to do anything else, and we'll click apply. Task flows, we're not too bothered about that for now. So that's that workspace created. So let's go back to the tutorial and see what's next. And so the next thing we need to do is grant the MQ extension access to our Microsoft Fabric workspace. So we need to click the Manage Access button and then select Add People or Groups and then paste in the name of the MQ extension. And then click Add to add the MQ extension contributor permissions in the workspace. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we can hit the Manage Access button just here. And then we can click Add People or Groups. And then we can paste in our MQ extension. And we can see now that this is important to note because you can tell this is working correctly because it's given it a correct icon here to say that it's found that MQ extension in our tenant, in our subscription, in our resource group essentially. So you know that this is correctly hooked up. So if it doesn't come up with this, it might come up with an error saying that it can't find that user. And then you've signed into a different tenant here essentially. So do make sure that you've got this correct and you'll know this is working. So we click the viewer button here. We need to set this to contributor and then click add. And so that'll add that. So now that MQ extension has got access to our Fabric workspace. So that's good. Admins and members have and contributors have edit and view access. So that's good. So that's all there now. So we can actually double check that. We can press Manage Access and we can see now that we've got our MQ extension with its contributor access. So if we switch back now to the tutorial. So we've done all of that. So the next thing we need to do is create a Lakehouse. So we need to go to New, More Options, and then select Lakehouse from the list. And then enter AIO MQ destination as the name of the Lakehouse and click Create. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can press New, and then More Options here at the bottom. And then we've got our Lakehouse just here. So we can go ahead and click on that. And then we'll give it the name that we were told. And then click Create. And then we've got a Lakehouse. So we can now go back to our tutorial and carry on. So we need to configure a connector, and it tells us here that your code space comes with the following sample connector configuration file. So it's in Workspaces, Explore IoT Operations, Samples, Quick Starts, Data Lake Connector, YAML. So let's switch over to VS Code and see if we can find that. So we want to be looking in Samples, Quick Starts, and then find the Data Lake Connector YAML. So if we go to Samples, and then Quick Starts, then we can find the Data Lake Connector YAML file. And that's here. So if I pull this down a little bit, see a little bit more of it. So let's return to the tutorial. So scrolling down, we can see that's the contents of that file, lots of YAML. And we need to open the Data Lake Connector YAML file and replace the Your Workspace name with the name of our actual workspace. So if we flick back to Microsoft Fabric, then we can go to our workspace, and we can see we called it PJG IoT Ops Workspace 1, and we can take a copy of that. And then if we head to VS Code, then we just need to find the Your Workspace name, which is here, workspace name, and we can replace that with PJG IoT Ops Workspace 1. So it's just that one. And we can save that. Now if we flick back to the tutorial, we need to save the file, which we've done, and then we need to run kubectl apply data lake connector YAML so that we can apply those changes. So we can copy that, and then we can paste that into here and run that. Error, the path data lake connector YAML does not exist. That's because we're in the root, so it's expecting that to be in the root, and it's not. So actually that should say samples / quick starts / data lake connector YAML. So let's try running that one instead. And there we are. So that's created that. Let's return to the tutorial again. And then after a short time, the data from your MQ broker begins to populate in the table in the Lakehouse. Make sure that no other processors write to this table, it says here. So otherwise we might get corrupted data. So yeah, we'll make sure that we're not doing that. So let's flick back to the Lakehouse and see if we can start seeing some data appearing in there. Let's just do a refresh. And now we have an OPC UA table. And then we have some data from our thermostat. So we can see that we've got the asset name, the current temperature, the pressure, and a timestamp. And we've got 59 rows in there at the moment. So that looks like data is flowing from our simulated temperature sensor through the MQ extension in IoT Ops on the edge in our code space. And then from there through a data lake connector, it's going up to Fabric and into our data lake table that we've got here. So we've got data flowing from a simulated sensor all the way up to Fabric. So that's pretty cool. So if we return to our tutorial, then now we're at the end. So how did we solve this problem? And we used the data lake connector for Azure IoT MQ to ingest data into the Microsoft Fabric Lakehouse in the cloud. And in the next quick start, we can use Power BI to analyze the data. So that's great. So thanks very much for following along, folks, and catch me in the next video. Thanks very much. Bye.